This is Steve Sapodowski, publisher of BuyUBuzz.com. And this morning, Friday morning, can't believe it's already Friday, when we have Colonel Rob Maness, who he and I are going to be talking about what's been going on here in Louisiana and the nation. Good morning, Colonel Maness. How you doing today, Rob?
Hey, good morning, Steve. I'm doing great.
Good.
Man, it's been a fast week, hasn't it?
Boy, it really has. I thought, really, absolutely. So, for those people who are watching, please go ahead and share with others. Let your friends know that you're watching this, and like the program. And again, please go ahead and share. If you have any questions, go ahead and post your questions. If you have any comments, you know what to do. Post those comments. So, Colonel Maness, what in the heck is going on here in Louisiana first?
Well, as we discussed last week, and I think we predicted, the tax increase bill did pass. I think they settled on 0.45, which was in the middle of where they started for this latest special session. So, not surprised by that. And those that want to fully fund big government are very happy, and those of us that are on the conservative and fiscal side are disappointed that we didn't take more measures to try to restrain spending, incorporate more fraud controls and those kind of things, and on the medical side, and look and take a thorough look at every program the state has to make sure we're spending the taxpayers' dollars the way the taxpayers want them to be spent. But anyway, we move on, and we can't forget that some good things happened in the state too. In the legislature, the unanimous jury's constitutional amendment is going to be on the ballot this fall. I encourage everybody to go vote for that. That's the right thing to do, and it brought everybody together, which surprised folks on both sides of the aisle. The governor just announced that the state has dropped from the number one incarceration state in the United States down to number two. That's good. That's good news too. We still have more work to do. That unanimous jury's bill amendment will have a positive impact on that also. It's not all bad news for those of us that disagreed with the outcome of the fiscal side, but disappointing that the state still doesn't have its fiscal house in order, and in a few years we will be having the same debate. I think that a lot of the media, from what I've been reading, there are some folks that think that the ghost of Bobby Jindal has now left the building, I think is what I read this morning.
Right.
But until we have a revenue system and a budget that the state can sustain based on its current and near-term future economic capability, we're going to continue to have these types of debates and emergency type issues come up with funding. So we need to continue to work to get tax reform done. And by tax reform, I don't mean the height of the sales tax or the level of the income tax. I mean reforming our tax system altogether as a whole, so that we develop a system that uses the economy that we are capable of generating in the most effective way. And then we've got to do some budget reforms too, Steve. Let me just put this out, and then I'll let you go there.
Sure.
But the budget reform, the key piece of that is we've got to figure out how to chain our budget to where it's constrained to what our system is capable of intake until the system intake grows, and that's economic growth and those kind of things. So I'd like to see that reform on the budget side too.
Okay. I see we have Bethany Williams and Lynn Matthews, John Cuvion are saying hi and all, and so let's say hi back. So how do you, obviously the Speaker of the House was really under a tremendous amount of pressure. Number one, if he didn't get a deal, then that would look bad for him generally.
Sure.
But if he got a deal, then it might look bad for him in terms of the conservative caucus. Am I correct about that? And also, what grade would you give him? And one last thing, those people out there, what grade do you give the speaker? And then we'll do the same thing with the governor.
Well, from my perspective as a fiscal conservative, I am a Republican. I believe in limiting government, making it the most efficient possible, and providing those services that the government needs to provide. So from my perspective, I would say that the speaker, he gets a C at best. Now, whether he looks bad or not, you know what? He made his choice. He's now looking bad to the conservative part of his party, and looking great to all those folks that like big government. And I'm not even going to call them moderates. I'm just going to say the left of center Republicans that voted with him from a fiscal perspective. That's the way it is. He's in the seat, and he gets to make those choices, and I don't feel bad for him one way or the other. But what he should have done, in my opinion, and the reason I give him a C, is that he should have stood up and said, "Hey, we're conservatives. This governor is not negotiating with us in good faith. The Democrat side of the aisle was not negotiating in good faith. The very first bill that was put out in the regular session was a compromise bill already." And everybody from the state level media on and Democrat politicians and the governor's folks were all saying the Republicans wouldn't compromise, and the very first bill was a compromise already. I mean, to keep even 0.33 cents of that extra penny that was supposed to expire here on June 30th to the conservatives was a compromise. So, it's unfortunate, but what's done is done, and we got to move on. But I guarantee you, until we do those reforms on the tax side and on the budget side, we will be back in the same debate. So in my mind, there's no victory here. There's just kicking a can down the road, as those political pundits like to say.
I had a discussion with a former legislator last week and asked Brett Guyman, as you know, a very, very nice guy, and asked him about having a constitutional convention. And he opposes it from the standpoint that, for different reasons, but also from the standpoint that, he doesn't know whether or not the everyday person who's not keeping up with what's going on in the legislature should be a delegate. Now, I know that can sound very elitist, no question, but at the same time, it presents, I think, the issue in terms of how are we going to do these reforms that you're talking about.
Yeah, the Constitutional Convention, I mean, I'm not opposed to the general idea of it, but this last session, the folks that put together the way delegates were selected were all in the big donor section. I mean, they basically really wanted to sit down and have him write the new. In my opinion, they would have had the delegates they wanted because of the way they chose to select the delegates in that bill. And as I've told Neil Abrams before, if we can figure out a way to actually get, everyday people elected as delegates where they're the majority of delegates, and maybe with a few folks that have been engaged on a day-to-day basis. There's folks in the parish executive committees in both parties. There's folks that are in local politics, state level politics that surely would be good to have on the team, but the majority of the delegate team should be made up of everyday citizens that are not involved in state politics, so that we get their view, because it's their constitution. We can't have an elite group of people on one side or the other write the new constitution if we're going to do it. So I'm not opposed to the idea. I just want to make sure that we work, we being all sides, work together to find the best way to select delegates so that the everyday citizen of Louisiana that's not in elected office has a majority vote on that delegation. And then that we have a few of those folks that may be considered experts or more highly engaged on there. So that's my view on it. It may disagree a little bit with Brett, but I think we're pretty close on that idea.
So let's say hi to Neil Wood, our friend Neil Wood and Jim Toops. They say hi. And
good morning.
Good morning. And so, again, if you have any questions, comments, please go ahead and pose. And so my question to the folks out there is what do we do to go ahead and to deal with this budget situation? Obviously, spend less money, no question. That is, I think we all agree that if we can spend less money, then that would be the first approach. However, there are a lot of people who did not want to give away tops, who did not want to have a cut in tops. There are a lot of people who didn't want to cut any of the anything in higher ed. A lot of students didn't want to cut any higher ed. So, I mean, you have a lot of people out there who are advocates of tops, advocates of higher ed, advocates of keeping prisoners in prison, who just will fight for it. So, I mean, the ultimate question I have is, other than cutting, which I think we have done over the, say, 8-year period of time, and we'll also raise taxes. My question is, well, should we, if we were going to really reform, should we tax property, the homestead exemption? Should we reduce it, get rid of it? Should we go back to Stelly? Should we just do none of that, lower the sales tax, and just cut until we bleed, and get rid of tops, get rid of some of the universities that have duplicative programs? Go ahead.
Oh, well, I advocate for a complete overhaul of the tax system, eliminate the income tax, the personal income tax, and the corporate income tax altogether, and go to a state level concept of a fair tax. It's been proposed and been in the U.S. Congress for quite some time, and it hasn't really been able to get out of the House of Representatives or the Senate. But at the state level, it could work even better. However, we've got to look at that because, that's a consumption tax. And as we all know, I think what we all know it on both sides of the aisle, consumption tax is more regressive on the poor. We have a very large poor population. So we would have to, just like the federal level fair tax concept that I've taken a look at, we would have to have a systematic methodology of protecting those that are in poverty to make sure that the tax is not too regressive on that. But what that does is that eliminates the corporate income tax and eliminates the personal income tax, and we put something like what's called a prebate, where everybody would get you actually get a prebate every month, and that's how you protect the poor. It's almost like the EITC, to protect the poor now at the federal level, but we just want to make sure. So we use that to make sure that the poor aren't impacted, but we do it on the front end, and instead of on the back end, because there's no need to do it on the back end because you don't file anything. But what that also does is it gives you the ability to look at things like other property taxes, property tax exemptions, and those kind of things in a way that isn't going to impact the current system. There's always a big fight about the property tax exemption for, say, corporations. I think it's about 10 years where if they come to the state, they get to pay no property taxes, I believe, for about 10 years. There's always a big fight about that if you go to try to eliminate that within the current tax system, because it sets everything off balance. So in my approach, you take a holistic view, you change the entire system, and you work out those issues along the way on where you're going to get the revenue from. It's a matter of just being an honest broker and sitting down at the table and doing the right thing. But what we can't have, Steve, is like a constitutional convention where, say, the one side that had the control of the delegates in this last proposal came in, and they would keep all their exemptions, but then the little guy in that particular case wasn't going to get them. That's why I wouldn't support it during the last term, even though I've run on supporting a state constitutional convention before. But it's got to be the right methodology and those kind of things.
Okay, so let me quickly read some of the comments to the question I asked. So Neil Wood says checkbook legislation and open review of the 14,000 contracts. Jim Toop says because the governor is government first, citizens last. I also want to say ask that Neil Wood asked the question: where does TOPS fall in order of expense compared to other line items? Why do you always start the cut conversation with TOPS always? And I think Neil's referring to me. The reason why I mention TOPS is because of the fact that I think that TOPS is an item that, in my opinion, should be looked at. I think Rob Maness also agrees with that. I'm not saying that we should do away with it. I think it has some value. I think that we need to look to see whether, instead of just cutting 30%, 20%, we should look to see whether or not there is another way of dealing with this situation where we stick to what was the stated goal, which was to provide incentives for our students, high school students, fairly, and also to give them an opportunity to do well in college. But if they don't do well, and if there's no other, say, extraordinary circumstances that would be underlying their performance, their bad performance, or not good performance, then maybe we should reduce or curtail or end. So, that's my take. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I don't mind having the conversation about TOPS because it impacts the most people in Louisiana. I mean, it's a program that impacts, I think, the most people and the average middle-class family in the state of Louisiana. And I don't think that the average middle-class family in the state of Louisiana, the voters in those families that pay taxes, have actually said, we want the state to fund higher education as like we do a public school. And essentially, that's kind of what TOPS is doing from my perspective, is it's funding basically, public college, just like Bernie Sanders wants to do. But the state of Louisiana, as a tax-paying entity and voting entity, I don't believe has really said that that's what they want to do. So I want to get the state on record and the voters and taxpayers on record. I believe we should get that on record as to how much exactly they want to do. The other thing is, look, I've said this a million times on your program, Steve. Every government program should be reviewed every year to look for efficiencies, look for better ways of doing the program that can save on costs and those kind of things. And if there is not a requirement in the TOPS program for the student and the parents to sign on the dotted line that says, if I don't graduate in 4 years with a 2.5 GPA or whatever the GPA level is, I'm not an expert on the program, and if I don't graduate, I will have to pay back everything that I've used in TOPS, then there should be. That's a common sense requirement. Look, we've got some of these universities, I think our average is about 36% graduation rate at the 4-year level and about 57% at the 6-year level. TOPS is designed to get to assist folks with a 4-year college degree, and that's what they need to be signing up for. It's not to give you a 6-year vacation so you can do things the way you want it to do. I mean, this is the taxpayers' dollar. It's our dollars. So the folks that are agreeing to use it need to sign up to some requirements, just like they sign up to maintaining a certain grade point average. And I think that will have a positive impact on efficiencies and costs that we wouldn't have, that we would save on that, because it would do two things. Number one, it starts the payback methodology for those people that don't graduate in 4 years. And two, it will probably prevent folks that are on the edge going, well, I don't know that college is right for me, but I got this TOPS thing here and I'm qualified to use it. I might as well go ahead and use it. And then they go party for a couple of years. And let's just be frank here. That does happen. And I know that does happen. And they get to do it on the public dime. And then they go do something else. So it would put a threshold there to where those folks might go into a technical college or a technical school system or certification system where they feel like they probably ought to be anyway. And there are other ways to do that, but those are just a few of the ideas that could be looked at that would save money in the system. And then the other thing is, are we really wanting to fund 100% of college, of 4-year college for every student in the state of Louisiana? And for everybody that qualifies, if everybody qualified every year on TOPS and met the requirements, that's essentially what we would be doing. So I just think that there are ways you could save money on that. It's a big outlay, and it has a huge impact on the middle class in Louisiana. That's why the politicians won't touch it. If they can get away without touching it, they will do that. It was very impressive that some of the conservatives actually did try to cut the TOPS program a few percentage points, even in the end. And I'm not surprised that none of those efforts made it through.
So our friend Lynn Matthews says 2.5, good Lord, at 2.5 you could sleep in class. That's a legitimate point. I mean, I know she's being sarcastic, but it is a legitimate point, and that is that how much money do we pay students to get average grades? I mean, 2.0, 2.5 is average.
2.5 is an average.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not to demean anybody at all. It just is that's what it is. So do we pay them to do that? Go ahead.
Again, that's just an example. I'll be honest with you. I don't use the program, so I don't know what the limits are off the top of my head. I'll have to go look that up. But that was just an example, so right. I didn't mean to imply that that's what the system does.
Right. Okay, so pardon me. Let's see. One other question about state government and what and this is also for viewers who please again share and like our video. Would love for you to do that if you haven't. So the question is, well, what grade do we give the governor? So tell us, those people watching, the grade that you give Governor John Bel Edwards, who will be up for re-election next year along with our legislators. Some are term limited. Some of those will be running for different office. And so it'll be really kind of an interesting year. What grade do you give the governor? Okay, Rob, go ahead. What grade do you give the governor?
Well, on the fiscal side, I got to give him a C minus, Steve. Because he didn't come in. First time his effort failed, which really was a half-hearted effort that didn't come in with a tax reform plan that any conservative was going to sign up to, and they wouldn't negotiate on it. From that time forward, none of his special sessions have included tax reform. He would get a lot further if he would come in and be honest, negotiate in good faith on total tax reform packages, and sit down with the Republicans and really do good negotiations on it instead of all these political games that come about. And it happens on both sides. I'm not pointing. Obviously, I gave Barra a C.
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
So that's where I'm at on that. That's fiscally, but I got to tell you, on things like criminal justice reform, those types of issues, I give him a B on that. I'm a conservative. It's not real clear to me that the that the release program that he's actually implementing is keeping the numbers in prison that should be in prison, and only letting the ones out that should be let out. That's one of my concerns. As a law, somebody that believes the law should be enforced properly. But as far as the concepts that I've advocated for and run on in the past and have supported, I give him a B in those areas.
Okay, so I'm going to put up a tweet, and bear with me. And unfortunately,
and I'm sure my conservative friends are going to hate me for that, but that's okay.
Well, okay, so the tweet I'm putting up is something I just happened to see. It went up 17 minutes ago from Julia O'Donoghue from the Times-Picayune. And what she says, here's the 8 changes to the Louisiana criminal justice system that have caused its prison, probation, and parole populations to drop over the last several months. So that's on Times-Picayune. I haven't done as much research as I would like in terms of the changes, the reforms. What is it about the reform that you really think is a winner?
Well, for one, you might have seen the news articles that put money towards the raise the age, where we were no longer automatically considering a 17-year-old an adult and putting them into the adult prison system. I think that's a good change. Now, I haven't been on the front lines like the groups and the young people that have been advocating for that, but I've always supported that change. I think the change of that we've done on life without parole to make sure that we're not putting folks up for like a third time having a marijuana joint in their back pocket to get life without parole, those kinds of issues, and that is, those are good things. Those are good things. We have to have a good approach. I like the fact that we were doing more diversion type court systems. The veterans court system has started. It's coming to my own parish here in St. Tammany Parish. A good friend of mine, retired Commander John Wells, advocated for that, and the DA and the judges helped put that into place. So those are the types of changes that I think are good. We just funded, I believe, more probation officers and probation officers and those kind of folks to look after the kids that may be coming out of that adult system for the raise the age side, and that will also help with the folks that are coming out of prison on parole and probation from that perspective. We've got to make sure that we are funding the programs that will support them and that should support them to get them reintegrated into society so they don't. So our recidivism rate also continues to decline. We want to make sure that we do that on the backside. And I think we are doing that, but not at a pace that I'm comfortable with. And that's what I was talking about. If the governor's releasing all these folks, then we've got to make sure we've funded the probation officers and parole officer system and make sure they have enough personnel and financial resources and equipment capabilities and training capabilities to provide for those folks on the backside so they get trained to do jobs and how to reintegrate into society smoothly and do those things. So we've got to make sure that that is actually happening. And when we passed the package last time, the backside was the part that wasn't funded. So we're starting to see funding go to some of those, but we've got to make sure we continue to do that. That's where my concern lies, is that we're not that we make sure that we do that backside work so that these folks are properly reintegrated into society.
Okay, so I'm going to do a bridge to some of the national issues right now. I'm looking at a post from one of my followers and a friend. Although he and I have a lot of arguments online, Rudy Matthew, and I hope I have his last name correct, Vorkapik. He was the publisher of the really popular newspaper down here after Hurricane Katrina, The Levee. And what he says, blame and excuses. Trump's not a conservative. Republicans cannot govern even when in control, nationally and statewide. You've seen it here with the disgrace that remains Jindal and all those in state government that empowered him to destroy the state. Then Dems come to their rescue and they complain Dems didn't come fast enough. Cheers, but there's nothing to like here, just propaganda. I disagree, Rudy. I think there's a lot here other than propaganda. But let me just take what he has said, and since I would like to talk about some of the national issues. And is Trump a conservative?
No, I don't think Trump is an ideologue. I think he is he's a pragmatist. He's a businessman. He's a leader in his own right, from his own experiences. He's had his successes and he's had his failures, which have led to his successes, like all of us have done. And he will continue to have successes and failures. But I don't think he's a conservative. I think he's a pragmatist. Now, does that mean that he won't implement a conservative policy? I think we've seen that most of the policies he has implemented have been conservative because they were the right thing to do from his pragmatic perspective at the time for his goal. And his mission statement of "Make America Great Again." That's a serious vision. I know a lot of people kind of take that and make a caricature out of it, but it's a serious vision statement from a corporate leader type thing, and that just tells you where his primary focus is. From his perspective, he's trying to make America great again. So he's going to lean in that direction. And a lot of these policies, and the reason why people call me a conservative, even though I think of myself as an American first, not a Republican, not a conservative, an American. And Americans are classical liberals in my mind, which is you go back to John Adams or a Locke and Madison and those kind of guys. And that's where I try to come from, I think. Anyway, so Trump goes to those conservative policies because they're the best thing to do from his perspective to meet that vision statement. But sometimes he's going to go to something less conservative. I think is the work that he's got his daughter Ivanka working on issues like family leave, on issues, on those types of issues. That's not a typically conservative standard-bearing deal. And I think that's where you're going to see him come from on some of these issues, and it's going to piss him off. I think on the Supreme Court, he's hit a home run so far, because you don't want an ideologue on the Supreme Court. Gorsuch and Scalia, those kind of guys were not ideologues; they're constitutionalists. There's a huge difference between a conservative and a liberal and a constitutionalist. Even a constitutional conservative, some people see. I use that the same term as a constitutionalist, but other people see that as different. That you don't want one perspective or another. You want them to be on the Constitution. So if he makes his next selection, and I know the left is extremely upset over this, and I'm sorry, folks, but this is the way the system works, and this president does get to make the next nomination when Mr. Kennedy retires. If he picks another constitutionalist, like one of the best ones that I've seen at the national level is Senator Mike Lee from Utah. And if he picks a person like that comes from that perspective to go on the Supreme Court, he will have hit a grand slam with that. And if he continues to do that and stays away from the ideologues, left or right, then I think that he will have made a huge impact on the future American history, probably the past.
Okay, so he's made a vow to pick a justice who will decide against Roe v. Wade. Should he do that?
Well, I think he's made a vow to pick justices that believe in liberty, and generally those are the constitutionalists to do that. Now, how that gets through the process and works its way through precedent and those kind of things, I don't know that is in the art of the doable for any justice in the near future. Now, personally, I would love to see Roe v. Wade eliminated. Look, 60 million American children have been killed by that since the 1970s. If you look at even the most conservative numbers, that's a big deal. From my perspective, it's a huge deal, and I believe that the unborn has the liberty and right to life just like the born do. So I would like to see a justice that's a constitutionalist, because that's our best chance to do that, picked. Because and I think that's probably where he's coming from. I don't think he's going to sit down with somebody and say, "Are you pro-life or not?" Even because he understands the dangers involved in those kind of
But
things.
he made that vow, so I mean, I think that
Right,
we should take him at his word. That
Sure.
I'm assuming that we should. And how would he know other than to ask the justice in questions that may not emit a yes, I will do this, but enough questions around the issue that he feels very confident. So let me just make an argument.
He's let me just interrupt you there for a second before you go on. Though he does have the list of 25 that he's working on. He's made it public. Those 25 are recommended by the Federalist Society. Mike Lee is on that list. A guy named Don Willett, who's I think he's on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals now. Who was a Texas Supreme Court justice, is on that list. Those guys are constitutionalists, and that list is where he's coming from. So one said he's going to pick from, and I would assume that all 25 of those are pro-life type people.
Okay, so an issue that I don't really understand. Okay, you use the term constitutionalist. Could you define it better other than adhering to the Constitution? I mean,
well,
I mean, because liberals will say that they're constitutionalists. People on the right will say that they're constitutionalists. So, can they both be constitutionalists?
Well, unfortunately, you have in the liberal mindset this concept of a living document. When I say constitutionalist, I'm talking about somebody that's both a contextualist, or originalist, which goes by the written word in the Constitution, the words that are in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and the amendments that go with that, and then the textualist, the contextualist. And they also marry that up with the context of the times of when those words were written. And they view all these issues through that lens first. The liberals do not do that, even if they call themselves a constitutionalist. They say that the Constitution is a living document. And what that means to a person like me is that it's a constant moving target. I can't rely on the parchment that's written there because I've got a liberal judge. It's like the gay marriage decision that was made. If you read especially Justice Scalia's dissent in that decision, the justices made a right up out of thin air that doesn't exist either in the Constitution or in the basis for the Constitution, which is natural law, or the Creator's law, some people call it, but natural law is where most people come from Blackstone and Locke and those kind of guys. So you can't just make things up out of thin air and then say, yep, this is a right, it's there. And the Roe v. Wade decision was essentially the same thing. That's basically, that is legislating from the bench. So that approach is the incorrect approach. The court wasn't designed to do that. As you can see now, our entire society is waiting on bated breath, and on the fringes of the cliff. If you or somebody on the left that's really concerned about this, Kennedy's retirement, over one guy who's not elected, who wears a black robe, that sits on a panel of 9 judges, and that's not what the Supreme Court was intended to do. So, if there's a liberal out there that views their decisions through the lens of the original text and the context within which it is written, and they can convince a person like me that that's actually what they do in their decision making, then it doesn't matter what political party you are and those kind of things. And that's the truth. It shouldn't matter what kind of political party you are. I think Senator Orrin Hatcher, I heard an interview with him yesterday. He said, "I'm tired of people politicizing and putting political justice nominations in. The court shouldn't be politicized. It's supposed to be making decisions based on the Constitution of the United States." So that's the difference between the two.
Okay, so Tim Allen Matthews says, to me, a constitutionalist is someone who takes the original text to rule on law instead of cultural changes. Albert Samuels up from Baton Rouge says that you have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
So okay, let me just throw this out to you then, because I'm really trying to grapple with this. You're saying that you should take the context of the current times, though.
No, the context of the times where the words were written.
Okay, I thought you said earlier to take both into context. Okay, so you completely ignore the context of the present, and you read.
It depends on.
And you read into.
You have to look at.
Go on.
You have to look at the issue you're facing. Say it's the internet, okay, which has to do with free speech and right of assembly and all of those things, right? So the internet, while it is a modern times result of technology of today, if you take the document, if you're trying to decide a case and you take the document's original text and the context of the times it was written in, and you view that issue through that lens, that's what Justice Scalia says. And I don't know who the guy is that said I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think this is basic stuff from civics and those kind of things. So
yeah, he's a professor.
All right,
but no, look, I understand what you're saying. I don't disagree with what you're saying. That you have to look at. You have to look at the times in the intent.
You have to take the issue which is of our times, but you have to look at those issues through the text and the context of the times in which the document was written first. That comes directly from Justice Scalia. I'm paraphrasing him now, and that fits the measure and the framework that all the constitutionalist folks that I've read about, seen what they do, read their dissents and their opinions and those kind of things.
Okay, so what's the second thing that you look at?
I'm just a guy that's been around a while.
Yeah. So what's the second thing that you look at? Because you said that you look at the times, the intent, the mindset, the environment that exists.
Well, you have to have the issue. You have to have the issue of. Let's take the issue. Okay, the issue is going, but you have to look at it through the lens of the original text and context. Tell me that there is a way to say that the Bergefell decision, when viewed through that original text and context of that issue, and that's the gay marriage issue, that there's the right to marry anybody you want. Okay, at the federal level, and it has to be applied to every state. Tell me how you get from the original text and context to that decision, and I would agree with you. But when you read Scalia's dissent, it's very clear that these guys made a write-up out of thin air, and you shouldn't do that. I can't say you can't do that because they obviously did, and the reason why that's important is, but just like Roe versus Wade, it will continue to be a societal issue as time goes on until that is settled in the right way. The Supreme Court's not perfect. Look, they've made terrible decisions before, and they made some really clear-cut ones, like this latest decision on the president's policy on the so-called travel ban. I mean, it's been very clear the entire time that the president was not being extra constitutional with that policy, whether you like it or not, whether you like the policy or not. The policy is constitutional, and the Supreme Court ruled on it very quickly and very succinctly. Now the dissenters went on and on and on about things but they weren't talking about the policy. Justices on the Supreme Court shouldn't be interjecting their dislike of a policy when they're ruling on whether a policy is constitutional power of the President of the United States. It's just not the way you should do it. You see what I'm saying?
No, yeah, I definitely see. Keep in mind, this was the third attempt. It did include, it was the third attempt. I don't know what they would have done with the first attempt. It did include countries that were, pardon me, that were not Muslim countries, but it also included Saudi Arabia, where Trump has business interests, which is very perplexing. So I don't know.
Saudi Arabia has never been on that list. That's not a new list. The Obama administration had the list. Those countries, that is not a new list. The State Department's had that list for a long time. Saudi Arabia has never been on that list. And I have problems with that too. I'm a survivor of the Pentagon 9/11 attack. 15 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. Exactly. So you can't tell me that it's not important. It is important. I have the same questions about that. But to say that it's unconstitutional when just because you don't like the policy is not the way a Supreme Court justice should be trying to rule. And those dissenting judges that wrote those opinions, they know that. If this was a Democrat judge, they would not have written those opinions. And that's unfortunate because the Supreme Court can't be political. And it has been. And that's been one of the biggest disappointments, I think, over the last 12 years of American governmental life, that I've seen that the Supreme Court has been so political. If the Brown versus Board of Education decision had been made in this environment that we have today, that would have been viewed as a political decision instead of the right decision that it was. And that's unfortunate. So, we'll have to go from there. But anyway, I believe that the president will pick the constitutionalists at 25 like he's promised to do.
Okay, so, this is really interesting discussion because I'm looking at some of the comments, which I'm going to read real quickly. We have about 5 more minutes. But it's, I think, a very interesting discussion given what is going to happen in the next couple of weeks or months.
I'm very interested to know why the professor doesn't know.
Yeah. I want to have him on as a guest, and so you'll be able to say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But here, let's just look at what Tim Allen Matthews says. He says, if speech applies, then something like
no. I want to know why.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. Are you still there? Okay, so you might need to come back into the room because you broke up. So while he reboots,
I want to know why the. So
I'm sorry.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so I think internet connection is a little bit is having some issues. Okay, so Tim Allen Matthews says if speech applies, then something like arms also applies.
I'm here.
Okay, even though they had no idea we would have automatic weapons. Okay, so. Tim, I agree with you that right to bear arms, even though you have automatic weapons, you look to what they said, the right to bear arms. And Lynn Matthews, I'm trying to find the prior comment, but it disappeared. So, Rob, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So let me just throw this out to you because I really am trying to understand this. And unfortunately, when I went to law school, a lot of these issues that are current did not come up at all. At the point in time, Roe v. Wade was still pretty fresh. went through all of many of, I should say, of the say reverse discrimination that just started. I went to law school, started in 1980. So here's my question: if you're talking about, let's say the situation that you brought up, which is the gay marriage. Sure,
Sure.
there was no comment in the Constitution about gay marriage. But what was the underpinning that the court found that gays have a right to be married?
Well, I think it was probably the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. That's where I believe that that type of decision should be placed, and where I would have come from. That if you're going to have a law that gives benefit to everybody else, then everybody's got to be equally protected under the law. So, does it have to be marriage, though? That's the issue. Uh, you know, uh, where I would have come from had I been on that court or been in the legislative process or a policymaker is that, you know, under the law, everybody should be treated equally. There's a couple of ways you can go. You can get the government completely out of marriage, okay, so that it's not required to get a marriage license and those kind of things. You don't get extra benefits from being married, but you can sign a civil contract with each other and get those benefits. And that's where that issue, I believe, I thought it was going to come down to that, and where it would have been at the federal level. But then these guys on this court said that no, there's a marriage can be defined however we want it to be. I'm like, okay, that's fine. As a person that I'm not the best Christian in the world. I'll never I aspire to be, but I'm a very imperfect individual and say and do things that
Sure, we all
don't,
do.
we all do, right?
Yeah.
But it's my belief, my faith teaches me that God created that institution, and we probably shouldn't mess with that. But that there was a way under the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, to take a pathway to where everybody is treated fairly. It's the same thing. And my issue with the decision is how it restricts religious rights and is being attempted to be used by activists on the left to restrict religious rights.
Okay, yeah.
I had a young lady.
That's a different issue, though.
I think the decision created that. When you have a young lady who's married to a minister that works in the clerk's office, and now she asked the state attorney general, and this is a true story, asked the state attorney general face to face, will you help me if I take a religious exception and say I don't want to issue this marriage license to a gay couple? And the guy goes, no, I'm not going to protect you, and there is no protection for you. You have to do it. We have religious protections and exceptions for all kinds of people, for all kinds of things in this country. That's how we have gotten through the 20th century and those kind of things, as social society has changed and those kind of things. And to say that we're not going to do that for a person like she happened to be a Christian, but it could have been a Muslim woman that didn't want to do it. It's just flat out wrong, and that's the issue that I have with just creating a right to marriage just out of thin air.
Okay. But I'm playing devil's advocate in part, and also, I really am grappling with this issue because, you're very strong on natural rights. I mean, that is the core. So the natural right, whether we like it or not, okay, the natural right is liberty, and the right to be married, and the right, Lynn Matthews says, get the government out of marriage. But if you have government in marriage, meaning that you can't get married if you're gay, then really you have government in marriage. So it's an issue of liberty. It's an issue of liberty, which is one of the very basic concepts that you espouse.
if you say that there is a right to marriage, that doesn't fall under natural rights. Natural rights are
does.
I have a right as a human being to live my life free from harm. I can protect myself. A natural right is I have a right to own property. I have without it being taken by others by force or by the government by force. It's as a human being, I have that right. It has nothing to do with marriage and these types of institutions. I think it does have something to do, which is where the 14th Amendment came from, I believe, to equal protection under the law. It does have that. I have a right to be equally treated by society, and the law represents that society. So I think if they had come from that perspective and figured out a way to actually get the definition of marriage out of the government, get the government out of marriage is the way most people say that, and just have a civil contract signed by everybody as the government's part, so that you when you sign the civil contract, then you can apply for those things like tax breaks, et cetera, and show it as your next of kin and those kind of things. But just take the marriage completely out of it. That's what the British did from a government perspective. You have two sets of systems. You got a government marriage and you have a religious marriage. Why not do that? Why go to the trouble of trying to create a right out of thin air? I mean, not everything's a right. It's like voting.
No,
I disagree that people say I have a right to vote. I have a responsibility to go vote, and a lot of Americans are not taking that responsibility very seriously these days.
Definitely not. Again, I think that the underpinning is freedom, and also, in my opinion, the underpinning is the First Amendment, meaning that you have the right to associate with whomever you want to associate with, unless it's unlawful, and or unless it's so repugnant to society or dangerous. But it's to me, it's a First Amendment right. It's and let me just say this: it's very foreign to me. Okay, I mean, when I grew up, I mean, the concept was, concept would be, totally rejected in all forms. So I'm trying to understand, and I'm trying to understand the whole concept of what a constitutional is, because I'm beginning to believe that I see what you're saying, that it's somebody who doesn't look at the current environment, only looks at what happened back then, and basically says that if the founding fathers were judging and they were asked the question, whatever the question might be, they would only look at what they said as it applied to the conditions at the time. Am I correct?
No, I think you take it a little bit too far, because the Constitution's been amended.
Well,
so
sure,
you
have
to look at all of those things.
Sure.
So to say that you've got to marry that hard, take that hard of a position is, look, they wrote a text. It's in English. They had a context they wrote it in. That's the first lens. It's more like it's the first lens you have to look through when you're looking at any of these issues in modern society, is that lens. And then if there's been an amendment, those kind of things like the 14th Amendment, I think you have to look through that lens. And I think that's where a lot of evangelical folks may have taken the wrong turn, myself included, for a time, is to not make sure that we're taking the Equal Protection Clause into consideration when we're talking about this type of issue. Because quite honestly, it's, as I testified when Mike Johnson was trying to get the Marriage Protection Act passed in the State House, that if folks on the side of gay marriage continued down the road they were going and try to force Christians, Muslims, people that have a very strong religious and faithful beliefs, and it's repugnant. It is, to use your word, it is repugnant to them. You try to force them using government to say that it's okay and to do the things that say that it's okay. That's just as wrong as you being denied something that's a natural right to you, or what you think is a right to you, or being mistreated or not being treated equally under the law. That's just as wrong, and that wheel will turn, and we'll have that discussion and debate again.
Okay.
And that's where I'm coming from, and that's why that's important. That's why the young woman in the clerk's office in a parish in Louisiana, when she asked the AG if he would help her get a religious exception, and he said, no, you have to do it. Well, that's just as wrong as what was happening to gay people that were being unequally treated under the law. What I'm saying is there is an approach here that could have been taken that didn't have to put something that's repugnant to half of the people in the United States into their state law and try to use government force to force them to make it okay, when all people really want is to treat each other equally. I'm talking the average person now.
Sure.
They want to be treated equally, and they expect to treat others equally. And you don't have to be nice, but you got to treat each other equally and give the same chance to everybody, the same opportunity to everybody. But that's not where we're going now. We're going to continue to have fights about this, and it goes way off the path of liberty. As you say, the liberty part of it is their opportunity to be with whoever they want. Their liberty opportunity is not to say we're going to take the institution of marriage and change it into something that's repugnant to more than half the people in the United States. And that's one of the issues. That's a major issue with that decision. But we'll see how it turns out. Most people have not been severely affected by it, but a few have. I mean, a federal judge put a woman in jail for 3 days over that in Kentucky, and that was really wrong. That's the ultimate use of government force to force someone to say something's okay that they believe is repugnant.
Okay. Well, listen, we covered, we just got an A in Constitution law, so we're going to have to end it now. If you could hold on.
We got an A. Thank you.
Yeah, we got an A, only because we were able to discuss without beating each other up. So in the day of incivility, you get an A for that. Absolutely. So hold on now, Rob. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Please share. If you haven't done so, please share, and we will see you very soon. Thank you very much. So.